difficult to choose numbers for a 20-minute set? Do you find that you have to stick to your best-known numbers?
Yes, we've just been talking about that. It is pretty hard to make the choice.
Yes, we don't really know quite what to do, whether to play the hits or to try and do something new. But I think in 20 minutes, really, we've got to play things that people know and will recognise, in Turkey or wherever they're watching, maybe.
Hopefully.
So we're still squabbling over that fact. That's what he's trying to say, yeah.
20 minutes. That was all Bob Geldof gave them. Not because Queen were special, not because Freddie Mercury was a legend, but because, in 1985, Queen were just another name on the list. 20 minutes wasn't a gift. It was a test. If those 20 minutes failed, Queen wouldn't get a second chance. Not later, not someday, not ever. They wouldn't be remembered as pioneers or innovators. They would be remembered as a band that used to matter. Backstage at Wembley, Freddie Mercury didn't speak much. He didn't joke. He didn't work the cameras. While other artists ran from interview to interview, Freddie sat still, gripping his half-cup microphone stand like it was an extension of his body. To most people watching, he looked calm. But calm isn't what was happening inside his head. Because Freddie understood something no one else did. This wasn't a concert. It wasn't even a comeback. It was a public verdict. 72,000 people in the stadium, 1.5 billion watching on television, and millions of them had already made up their minds. Queen were past their prime. Freddie was excess from another era. The future belonged to someone else. 20 minutes would either confirm that or violently rewrite it. And as Freddie waited for his cue, he wasn't asking if the world would listen. He was asking something far more dangerous. What if they don't? But that wasn't the whole story. Before we continue, if you love the stories of Freddie Mercury and Queen and want to help keep his legacy alive, subscribe to this channel, like, and share. By the mid-1980s, Queen were no longer the band critics feared or fans defended. They were something worse. They were predictable. The warning signs had started earlier. Hot Space confused longtime listeners with disco rhythms and funk grooves that felt disconnected from the Queen people thought they knew. Even though Under Pressure became iconic, the album itself left scars that never fully healed. In America, the reaction was brutal. Radio stations quietly pulled Queen from rotation, ticket sales softened, reviewers stopped treating their releases like events and started treating them like obligations. The band that once filled stadiums was suddenly questioned at every turn. Then came the controversy no one could spin away. The Sun City performances during apartheid didn't just damage Queen's reputation, they froze it. To the American press, it became proof that Queen were careless, out of touch, and expendable. Whether fair or not, the verdict stuck. By 1985, Queen existed in a strange limbo. They weren't failures, but they weren't leaders anymore. New bands were louder, younger, hungrier. The music press moved on, and Queen felt heavy, like a reminder of something the industry wanted to outgrow. And that's the dangerous place Freddie Mercury found himself in. Not hated, not loved, just dismissed, which meant that Live Aid wasn't an opportunity. It was a final audition. And if it went wrong, Queen wouldn't fall from the top. They would quietly disappear. When Bob Geldof built the Live Aid lineup, it wasn't about honoring legacies, it was about momentum. Artists were placed according to relevance. Who was current? Who mattered right now? Queen's slot told a quiet but brutal truth. They weren't opening. They weren't closing. They were somewhere in the middle. A safe choice, a recognizable name. A band people wouldn't complain about but wouldn't wait for either. To the organizers, Queen were dependable, professional, controlled. To Freddie Mercury, that was an insult. Because dependable doesn't change history. Dependable doesn't stop the world. And worst of all, dependable doesn't scare anyone. Backstage, Freddie could feel it. The hierarchy, the subtle glances. Younger artists surrounded by handlers and journalists. Veterans treated politely, but without urgency. Queen existed between those worlds, respected, but not anticipated. That perception followed them everywhere. Every interview, every article, every booking. Freddie knew the danger of that label. Once an artist is filed away as reliable, the audience stops watching closely. They assume they already know what they're about to see. And that assumption is lethal. Because Live Aid wasn't forgiving. There was no encore, no reset, No room to warm up. If Queen played it safe, they would vanish inside the noise of the day. So Freddie made a decision silently. If this was going to be the end, it would not be a quiet one. As the afternoon progressed at Wembley, the atmosphere became louder, faster, more chaotic. Performances blurred together. Each act added to the noise, the spectacle, the energy. Freddie Mercury did the opposite. He withdrew. While other performers burned energy backstage, Freddie conserved it. While others chased attention, he watched. He studied how the crowd reacted, when they cheered, when they drifted, when they leaned forward. This wasn't nerves. It was calculation. Freddie understood something most artists never do. A crowd of 72,000 people doesn't want to be entertained. It wants to be led. And leadership requires timing. Queen's rehearsal earlier that day had been surgical. No wasted movements, no indulgent solos. Every second planned, every transition sharp. They weren't preparing for a concert. They were preparing for an interruption, to cut through an event already overflowing with stars. Freddie didn't need volume. He didn't need fireworks. He didn't need sympathy. He needed control. And control starts with silence. As the call finally came, Queen, stand by Freddie stood, lifted his half-cut microphone stand, and looked at Brian, Roger, and John. No speech. No pep talk. They didn't need one, because all four of them knew what the world didn't yet understand. These 20 minutes weren't about proving Queen was still good. They were about proving everyone else had been wrong. And once Freddie stepped into the light, there would be no way back. Queen didn't approach Live Aid like a celebration. They approached it like a compression problem. 20 minutes was not enough to show range. It was barely enough to survive. So Freddie made a brutal decision. Nothing could breathe. No long intros. No extended solos. No indulgence. Every song had to serve a purpose beyond nostalgia. Bohemian Rhapsody wouldn't be performed in full. It was chopped, reshaped, stripped to its most recognizable bones. Not because Freddie lacked confidence, but because he understood something critical. Attention is fragile. Radio Gaga wasn't chosen because it was recent. It was chosen because it invited participation, because it turned a passive crowd into a visible force. Hammer to Fall brought urgency. Crazy Little Thing Called Love reset the tempo. We Will Rock You and We Are the Champions closed the trap. This wasn't a greatest hits set. It was a psychological assault. Freddie designed the set to escalate control. Each song pulled the audience closer until the crowd stopped reacting and started responding. He wasn't trying to impress them. He was conditioning them. By the time Queen walked toward the stage entrance, Freddie knew something crucial. If the audience followed him once, they would follow him anywhere. But that still wasn't enough, because one thing could still destroy everything: the first 30 seconds. And that was the moment Freddie had been saving everything for. At 6:18 p.m., Queen stepped onto the Wembley stage. The applause was polite, not explosive, not electric, just recognition. The kind given to artists people remember but no longer expect from. Freddie noticed immediately, and he didn't rush. Instead of charging forward, he paused just long enough for the tension to stretch, long enough for the audience to lean in subconsciously. Then the opening notes of Bohemian Rhapsody rang out. Not the full opera, not the spectacle, just enough. Something strange happened. Before Freddie even finished the first line, the crowd started singing. Not cheering, not clapping, singing. 72,000 people instinctively filled the space Queen had left open. And in that instant, the power dynamic shifted. Freddie smiled barely. Because this wasn't luck. This was confirmation. The audience wasn't waiting to judge Queen. They were waiting to be invited. The band moved seamlessly into Radio Gaga, and suddenly the stadium wasn't watching anymore, it was participating. Hands rose, claps synchronized. Cameras captured something no one had planned. Unity. Freddie felt it immediately. The resistance was gone. The crowd had crossed a line. They weren't spectators now. They were his instrument. And Freddie Mercury had just realized something dangerous. He wasn't fighting to be remembered. He was about to take control of an event no one thought he owned. Freddie Mercury didn't celebrate the crowd's response. He exploited it. As Radio Gaga surged forward, he moved with absolute precision. Every step was measured, every gesture exaggerated just enough to be read by the furthest seat in Wembley. He wasn't performing for the audience anymore. He was shaping it. Then he did something reckless. He removed the band. The music stopped. The instruments fell silent. And 72,000 people suddenly realized they were exposed. Freddie stepped to the front of the stage alone, lifted the microphone, and released that first sharp vocal call into the open air. It echoed for a fraction of a second before the crowd answered back instinctively, loudly, without hesitation. Freddie pushed higher. The response followed. Longer, louder, more confident. This wasn't rehearsal. It wasn't planned. It was a test of dominance, and the crowd passed without knowing they were being examined. For those minutes, Freddie wasn't a singer. He was a conductor. Backstage, people stopped moving. Technicians froze mid-task. Other artists abandoned conversations to stare at the monitors. Something had gone wrong or impossibly right. Freddie Mercury had turned a charity concert into a call and response ritual involving tens of thousands of people and over 1 billion viewers. And the most dangerous realization settled in: the crowd wasn't just listening anymore. They were obeying. After the vocal improvisation, something unexpected happened. The noise changed. The chaos that had defined Live Aid all afternoon disappeared. The cheering softened. The energy tightened. Wembley didn't erupt, it focused. Freddie sensed it immediately. This was the moment most performers would ride the adrenaline and rush forward. Freddie slowed down. Hammer to fall hit with controlled aggression, not volume for volume's sake, but precision. Brian May's guitar cut through the air with clarity. Roger Taylor drove the tempo forward without overpowering it. John Deacon anchored everything beneath the surface. This wasn't chaos. It was command. And then came the stomp. We Will Rock You didn't start as a song. It started as a physical response. 72,000 feet struck the ground in perfect unison. The sound wasn't applause, it was force. Wembley itself became part of the performance. By the time We Are the Champions began, the outcome was already sealed. Freddie didn't sing like someone hoping to be validated. He sang like someone delivering a verdict. The cameras caught faces, frozen in disbelief. People weren't dancing anymore. They were staring, processing, realizing they were witnessing something that could not be repeated. This was no longer a band playing their hits. This was a takeover. And everyone in that stadium knew it. As Queen walked off the stage, the reaction behind the scenes was immediate and revealing. The polite nods disappeared. The casual distance evaporated. Artists who had barely acknowledged Queen hours earlier now stood silent, watching the monitors with expressions that hovered between admiration and disbelief. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Schedules were forgotten. Bob Geldof didn't hesitate. He understood instantly what had happened. Queen hadn't just delivered a great set, they had redefined the entire event. They had exposed something uncomfortable. That preparation, instinct, and control mattered more than hype or timing. Other performers felt it too. The bar had been raised impossibly high, and it had happened in just 20 minutes. Backstage, the narrative rewrote itself in real time. Queen were no longer the safe band in the middle of the schedule. They were the benchmark. Journalists scrambled to recalibrate their language. Industry figures quietly revised their assumptions. The same band many had considered past their prime had just delivered the most complete performance of the day without excess, without spectacle, without apology. Freddie Mercury didn't celebrate. He didn't need to. The shift was already irreversible. Queen hadn't asked for attention. They had taken it. Decades later, people still ask the same question. Why those 20 minutes? Technically, nothing was revolutionary. No new songs. No new technology. No surprise collaborations. And yet, no performance from that day is remembered the same way. Because what Freddie Mercury understood and executed was something deeper. He read the moment perfectly. He recognized that Live Aid wasn't about music. It was about focus, about unity, about seizing attention in a world already overwhelmed by sound and spectacle. Freddie didn't compete with the event. He controlled it. In 20 minutes, Queen went from being questioned to being unquestionable. Radio stations reversed course. Album sales surged. The band's relevance didn't just return, it solidified. But more than that, those minutes became a blueprint. Music schools study them. Documentaries dissect them. Performers chase that same impossible balance of authority and connection, almost always falling short. Because moments like that don't happen by accident. They happen when preparation meets instinct, when silence meets timing, and when an artist steps into the spotlight fully aware that failure is possible and proceeds anyway. Freddie Mercury didn't walk onto that stage to remind the world who he was. He walked on knowing exactly who he needed to be. And in 20 minutes, he became eternal. When Freddie Mercury walked off the Wembley stage, he didn't look triumphant. He looked emptied. Because everything he had been holding back, the doubt, the calculation, the years of being underestimated had just been released in 20 unforgiving minutes. Queen didn't win Live Aid because they were louder. They didn't win because they were famous. They won because they understood the moment better than anyone else on that bill. Freddie knew the world was watching not kindly, not generously, but critically. He knew that history doesn't give credit for effort, it only remembers outcomes. And in those 20 minutes, he delivered something no one else did. Control, connection, command. That performance didn't just revive Queen's career, it changed how live music would be judged forever. From that day on, concerts weren't just about songs, they were about authority, about presence, about whether an artist could walk into uncertainty and bend it to their will. Freddie Mercury never spoke about Live Aid as a victory, because to him, it wasn't. It was survival. And the reason it still resonates decades later is simple. We all recognize that moment, the one where everything is on the line, where failure is possible, and where there is no backup plan. Freddie stepped into that moment, and he didn't blink. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel because we tell the stories behind the moments that change everything. Like this video if you believe Live Aid was more than a concert. And comment below, do you think any other artist in history could have done what Freddie Mercury did in those 20 minutes? Let's talk.